All right, good morning and welcome to the VIP seat. Today is October 10th, and our top stories in aviation this week include a new rule for mechanics that could be devastating to the industry, and the feud between federal regulators and civilian rescuers in the aftermath of Helene. Your hosts today include yours truly, Jessie, Naor, and our guest, Delray Dobbins. Thank you for joining us today.
Jessie, thanks so much for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
Going to be fun. All right, folks, sit back, buckle up, and let's take off. All right, Delray. So before we roll into our first story today, a lot of folks know you from your Rolls-Royce and Pratt & Whitney days, but I heard that you have an announcement to make this morning.
I do, Jessie. I was with a lot of people know me from the Pratt & Whitney. I did global strategy for the ESP program for the last 6 years. Starting today, I've taken a new role with Engine Assurance Plant based out of Dallas as a director of global strategy. And for those of you that may not be familiar with Engine Assurance Plan, they are a pay-per-hour program provider that specifically focuses on out-of-production aircraft and engines. When COVID came along, a lot of those aircraft that were long in the tooth that were probably close to getting parted out, suddenly got a new lease on life. And so our niche is focusing all of our experience and resources on keeping older aircraft flying through a cost-effective value pay-per-hour program, including our own lease engine support.
That's fantastic. Well, I mean, yeah, definitely keeping those assets alive longer and as used as long as we can. That's a great mission and certainly a challenge. So one that I'm sure you'll meet.
Absolutely.
All right, so our first story we've got today, Textron, a few years ago, actually back in 2021, their Bell helicopter division had announced an eVTOL concept. It was supposed to be a hybrid propulsion. Safran was working on the engines. Nexus was the name of the concept aircraft. So this week, they have announced they're actually going to be doing test flights starting next year, which is exciting. But I'm slightly disappointed because it's not going to be a hybrid anymore. And I really don't understand. They've taken Bell kind of out of the marketing when I thought, Bell was really just such a great thing to embrace because it's got such a great history of being a helicopter company. It wasn't a mistake. Obviously, I think Textron's going to be successful, but what's your take on it?
Well, I mean, Textron has a history of bringing great products to market. They're about to launch their Citation Ascend as their next generation XLS line. So it does beg a few questions when you have a company under your umbrella like Bell that has a great history of bringing rotorcraft to market and vertical takeoff and landing, being almost an expert in that space. Why would you not leverage that branding for this next evolution of vertical takeoff aircraft? Great question. I don't know the answer, but it sure. And you know what? Maybe when they decided to change their minds and show up at NBAA here in a few weeks, maybe it'll become clear. Maybe they'll show us something. Oh, that's why. But yeah, it's certainly begs the question.
Yeah, and I was, we've watched this whole eVTOL space, start to open up, start to become commercialization. And my thought originally, and maybe it's just because of the world that I come from, but I thought if anyone's going to do this well, it's going to be someone who has the background. So coming from a helicopter operation, a very strong, diverse fleet operator or builder like Textron or Embraer, I feel like they're going to have kind of the best chance at a good product going to market. So I'm excited to see it and I'm curious, but I definitely am also disappointed that it's not a hybrid because it's like no one seems to be pursuing hybrid propulsion in a world where battery power just isn't that great yet.
Maybe Textron has found the magic solution for the battery technology. I mean, most of the trade show articles and industry articles in the last 5 years have all focused on the limiting factor is battery technology. I mean, you look at Joby. Embraer did several conceptual videos a couple of years ago at CGI Miami with Michael Amalfitano. And they were looking heavily into that space. So, yeah, I take your point. It's the company that's going to be the most likely successful in that space is going to have a lot of well-funded backing.
Yeah.
And most likely that's going to be a Textron or an Embraer or a Bell. Joby, startup. I'm optimistic for them, but it's still early.
It's very early. So, well, we'll keep our eyes out. I do think, if anyone has the chance, and I'm a big lover of the Bell product, I think a helicopter company or a company that owns that helicopter company is got some definite competitive advantages over the newcomers to the space. But
Well,
we shall see.
I think you've probably ridden in a few Bell products over the years, haven't you?
I do. I am a self-professed Bell 407 enthusiast, and you can't convince me that there's any better helicopter out there.
Awesome.
So in other news this morning, I found the tweets quite interesting between Elon Musk and Pete Buttigieg. And man, I just mentioned Elon Musk on this show last week. I just he's always in the news, in our news for some reason. But he's highlighting that there is some frustration right now in Western North Carolina and Tennessee in the Helene aftermath. Everyone has seen on the news how helicopter companies and private jet operators have just, gone en masse to support efforts down there. But that has also created some frustration on the FAA side and some others because they've had 30 near misses in the last week. But at the same time, a lot of locals have been complaining, and my dad is a local, so this is one area that I kind of know what's going on right now, that, honestly, the government wasn't really there after the first week of the disaster response. So because those civilian missions came in and helped them, they really saved a lot of lives. And now people are complaining, well, the government's blocking us from continuing our work. So it's a tricky situation. I get the safety aspect of it. But Delray, if you were in charge, how would you manage this chaos?
Well, this is, what happened with Helene, and it's a little bit unprecedented because there was so much damage so far inland. And so, when a hurricane comes, it's normal for the utilities and the certain agencies to prep closer to the coastline. But this is not the first natural disaster by any means. And so the government and FEMA should be used to, after decades of general aviation, arriving in force, how can we help? This should not be a surprise to the government or FEMA. And so they really, I fault them a little bit for not being able to streamline. Here's all the resources. Clearly, by the people in need, you need these resources.
Yeah.
Figure out a way to embrace the resources instead of threatening to arrest a pilot for flying his helicopter into this area. Okay, yeah. One of my favorite phrases is, don't tell me no, just tell me how.
That's a good one. Yeah.
And because the alternative is telling me no, that's right up there with, that's the way we've always done it, which is one of the worst answers ever.
Yeah.
So don't tell me no, tell me how. Don't threaten to arrest the guy. Just say, hey, do this, follow this process for safety, but
Right.
don't turn away people who show up with private aircraft who want to take time out of their life to help.
Yeah, and a lot of the complaints right now is that, they've put in a prior permission request for Asheville Airport, which was one of the biggest that were affected, that has to go through FEMA. But the time to get a FEMA approval to actually get to the airport is taking forever. So a lot of these operations that were really nimble and moving fast and helping are now constrained. Elon's tweet or he didn't tweet it to Pete Buttigieg, but he did tweet, he was concerned that it was going to slow down the distribution of Starlink because there are communities that still don't have cell service. So they can't even coordinate with the locals on the ground because they can't reach them. So it's this really weird moment where it's like there's an obvious need to help, and the regulators want to also ensure safety, but it's not really conducive to actually making a difference. So I don't know. I'm like, let him go. That's what airspace is for. That's why we have rules that we have. That's why we have air traffic control. See and avoid. If you're taking the risk out there to fly VFR as a helicopter operator, you should take that on.
And go back to technology. Most aircraft running around, I know the aircraft I fly, I have ADS-BN. I can see almost everything around me. And so the safety technology allowed a higher degree of safety than we had 10 years ago in these natural disaster spaces.
Right. Let the aircraft do what they're supposed to do. Now, there was also a pretty strong warning from the drone operators, don't operate drones in these spaces. That one I'll give you. They don't have the same safety technology and abilities. They do offer some serious visual support and help, but as someone who's been in helicopters and seen a drone come up along the way, it's like, it makes me a little uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's not cool.
Yeah, no. So lots of regs, if people are considering going down there to help, pay attention to the TFRs that are changing all the time. Again, there's a lot of PPRs now at all these different airports. And I'm sure we're going to see the same thing now with Milton coming through. It's cool to see people come together. And I think it's like we've never seen before, just the combination of technology and the internet. We spoke about it a little bit last week in the podcast, but definitely our industry has saved lives in the last couple weeks, and they'll continue to do so. All right, so I was listening to a podcast last night that went in depth to this, and I sent it to you, Delray. But I think, and I'll post it in the show notes too, so people can listen to it later if they really want to deep dive on this. But we have a new FAA interpretation for mechanics that is really going to be threatening the industry in a serious, serious way. And I've heard some people talk about it, but I don't think it's getting enough news at this point. But Delray, do you want to go ahead and give us what's going on? Why is it a big issue, and what should we be doing about it?
Yeah. So this has really upended the aviation maintenance side of the house. So I understand it, the manager of the FSDO, Flight Safety District's office in Little Rock, a gentleman by the name of Mr. Moss, requested an interpretation from the FAA lawyers regarding how a certificated A&P mechanic supervises the work of another non-certificated person doing maintenance. It doesn't matter what the maintenance is, but the FAA 43.13D basically says that a certificated mechanic can supervise another person who's not certificated to do maintenance work up to the point that the certificated mechanic is licensed to do. So it's almost like a force multiplier here. And there's a key phrase in that FAA regulation that says the supervision to take place is necessary to the extent to make sure the work is done correctly. That's been the standard for 60 years. And this affects, there's so many mRNO facilities around the country that do internship programs using this certificated mechanic supervising non-certificated mechanics. It's how a lot of people become A&P mechanics. So the interpretation came back about 2 years later. I'm not quite sure why it took 2 years, but okay, we'll let that one go. The ruling said that the certificated mechanic has to be present, and this cannot be via Zoom or Teams. Can't be via video. You've got to be present in the space.
Or a phone call.
Okay, so we got a 60-year regulation here, and now they're weighing in on the presence of new technology. No, you can't use technology to be present, which I find interesting because doctors can do surgeries remotely using robotics. If that's not safety of life, I don't know what is. But you can't use it for the purpose of doing aircraft maintenance. Where the real rub becomes is they didn't stop there. They went further and said, not only can you not remote in via Zoom, you must be present 100% of the time while the non-certificated mechanic is doing the work. So let's think about this. You take a fuel control off of a PT6 off a King Air. Maybe it takes an hour and a half to remove the fuel control. Maybe it takes 5 hours to install and rig the fuel control. Following this latest interpretation, the certificated mechanic has to sit there 100% of the time where you're doing the removal. And the removal is not the critical phase.
Right.
And so this 60-year regulation that's been a force multiplier and let a certificated mechanic supervise multiple interns, this has the ability to really cripple the future pipeline of A&P mechanics. There was an industry
crippling shops today.
And it probably one of the words that has driven the most fatigue in this industry is the word supply chain. We've heard that word so much in the last 5 years, and I don't think it's interpreted in the right way, because when people say the word supply chain, I see the look on people's faces and they think engines and fuel controls and parts and tires and brakes. The implications is much broader than just the hardware. It's the talent. It's the people. It's the labor force. And so the supply chain, the shortage in the labor force was predicted in an industry article back in 2017 that said we would need something like 48,000 mechanics by 2027. The shortage starts in 2022 and it peaks in 2027. That was per an article in 2017. But now there was a bit of reprieve because COVID occurred in early 2020 and everything kind of dropped off. So the initial impact wasn't felt in 2022, but now we are. So that's the background, is that this interpretation is now going to be used as guidance for all the FISDOs around the country. And we already have a massive shortage of aircraft mechanics. This is going to exacerbate that.
I was listening to Mike Bush, who is just a really, really well-known A&P expert. He had a fantastic comments on this, and I think one of the things that he was citing is that this is an FAA interpretation is not supposed to be rulemaking, but this is such a drastic change that it really should be rulemaking and go through a notice of proposal, give industry time to comment. So what they're wondering is maybe this was just some huge disconnect between, the maintenance people, who know how the system works, and the FAA's legal office who actually wrote this interpretation. But if this is really going to be the FAA's stance, a lot of hollering needs to happen. A lot of communications need to happen. And I know people are worried, like, oh, why are there unlicensed people working on airplanes? But there's no other way to learn. That's the process. It takes 30 months of an apprenticeship to get your license. So if you have no opportunity to sit there and learn and do every day, and at the end of the day, the A&P that's signing off the work, they still have to inspect it. They still have to make sure the work was done. Their license is at risk. It is not like we're sending people out to go do tire changes and, signing them off through a Zoom camera. That's just not what the intent of all this is. So a lot of nuance, but certainly, they need to fix this like yesterday. Like everyone is just screaming right now because of this.
Yeah, the implications are draconian. And when you look at the existing rule that's been there for 60 years, couple things come to mind. One is, are they going to rewrite 4313 in light of this new interpretation? Because right now the interpretation conflicts with awarding at 4313D. So something's got to give, because now the interpretation does not clearly align with the regulation. The second thing is, the industry's been working this way for years. Nobody should be worried about an uncertificated mechanic working on their airplane in a proper shop. There's also an FAA regulation that says when you're performing a task, the printed procedure to do that task has to be in your work area. So it's not like you're just doing something from memory. You're reading a task card, you're reading a procedure, and you still got the guy across the hangar to go get him if you need it.
Right. Yeah. And at the same time, too, I noticed that Delta just became the first airline approved to use drones to do an inspection. So even though the letter says that you can't replace the mechanic with a technology tool, well, then why is Delta getting this exemption all of a sudden? And you've just destroyed every other part of the industry. Doesn't really jive.
Yeah. No. I think what you're hinting at there is that the FAA was just inconsistent.
I'm hoping so. I'm hoping that it was just the original interpretation of a 60-year-old rule was this, and rulemaking needs to happen. But we'll have to see. I know the alphabet groups are on it, but if anyone out there is listening, bring it up with your representatives, because at Grandview we had an apprenticeship program. That was how we got A&Ps through the door. It was a great opportunity for them to learn the industry, and we were never going to assign them a task that they weren't able to do. This was simple things like doing the non-critical parts of the job, so the mechanic can go over and type things up and do other things while they're doing things that aren't safety related, they can learn.
This really touches on something else, is that the pipeline for our industry, for aviation technicians, we already know there's a shortage. This interpretation is going to dramatically affect the shortage even further. You'll notice I'm at Purdue University. I'm a Purdue graduate. I came out of here in '92 with my A&P and my commercial instrument license. Purdue Aviation had a career fair today. And so the nice folks down at EJM had a booth up here, invited me to come up and hang out with them and talk to students about why they should look at not just the airlines for a career, but look at business aviation. So I've been hanging out with students all day, talking to them about business aviation. And as part of the MBAA maintenance committee, who I'm on with Andy Keel from EJM, we've been around to certain Part 147 schools and we've talked to students. And I hear things that really alarm me, in that the demand for students with technical expertise has never been higher. And I hear stories of like 60 people will start students in an A&P class, only 30 graduate, because they're getting poached and defected into other industries like marine, HVAC. All the trades you learn as an aircraft mechanic have an appeal to other industries. When you learn avionics, engine mechanics, hydraulics, electrical, you learn how to interpret blueprints and schematics. All these other industries are coming at our students that are looking at aviation, may already be in an A&P school, and then they realize, oh, I don't have to finish A&P school and I can go make $75,000 a year or even 100 in a nut HVAC. As an industry, we have to stop what we're doing. We have to stop our regular jobs, and we have to go to places like Purdue or Tarrant County College in Fort Worth or Western Michigan or Embry-Riddle and go talk to them about, you had an interest in aviation in general. We need to go further that interest in aviation and try to mitigate the technically minded people who have skills. We want them to stay in our industry and come into aviation and hopefully even business aviation.
And I mean, do you think the pipeline is big enough in the first place? Are we not only engaging them at the college level, but, how do we engage younger people who didn't even think that, aviation was an option in the first place?
You get into the high school and some of the STEM activities and efforts. All of that is good. We need more. You just need more. The Northern Cal Business Association is doing a presence at San Jose State with their aviation program. And so what's interesting here at Purdue, I saw a lot of business aviation businesses here having a table. EJM is here. JSX is here. Gulfstream is here. FluxJet's here. I mean, there's a lot of businesses here coming out from corporate aviation that I don't think were coming to shows like this 10, 20 years ago. And we want them here. We need them here to keep them in aviation.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that, I mean, I'm a lot more familiar with the pilot recruiting side, because to be honest, we didn't go to the maintenance folks either, but we probably should have been. But is there also the same issue with, corporate aviation versus the airlines? Are there, I'm sure everyone's competing over resources. So are you seeing mechanics go more the airline route, or are they more interested in business aviation? Do we offer something different?
No, that's an interesting question, Jessie. I've known pilots over the year that kind of jump from corporate to airline. Airline's a little bit more cyclical. Then again, they would argue the pilot side of corporate aviation is also cyclical. I've seen the pilots jump back and forth. I haven't really noticed the technicians jumping back and forth. Usually the technicians I know in my circle of industry friends, usually once they're on one side of the fence, they seem to stay there.
Yeah, I would think, especially in corporate aviation, working with a private owner, it just seems like a much more like laid back, not laid back necessarily, but just probably better lifestyle than necessarily working for the airlines. Work on your terms, work the shifts you want to work, and different world. But that's good to hear that at least business aviation has got a little bit of a pull in one labor area, because I'll tell you, on the pilot side, the salaries have just become completely non-competitive. We can't pay people $450,000 a year to fly a Phenom 300. Just like the economics just don't work.
I've talked to several flight departments in the last 3 to 6 months, and comments of, we had to increase pay 20, 25%, not just for the pilots, but also for the mechanics, just to keep them up where they need to be to keep the right talent. Right. Just to reduce the risk of them going somewhere else. And so that's comfortable from a finance bottom line margin perspective, but you've got to do what you've got to do to keep the people you've already invested in.
I'm also wondering if this interpretation holds up, if this FAA interpretation saying that, it basically destroys apprenticeships. I mean, let's be honest.
It does.
That's just gone. If that happens, does this become like the 1,500 hour rule for pilots? Is there now this gap between the person fresh out of school versus the person with experience, and we can no longer bridge that gap anymore. I think mechanics, like, we have apprenticeship programs where we can do that. This could totally upend that and do the same thing to mechanics that did to pilots.
And if this holds up, the 48,000 technicians that were forecasted to be short by 2027, you throw this rule into the equation, what does that 40,000 become? Does it double? It's going to be worse, significantly worse, because the 48 shortage in technicians was based with an apprenticeship program fully in place, unthreatened.
How many, and you may not know the number off the top of your head. I mean, I know as a 135 operator doing our own work, we would have, maybe 3 or 4 apprentices to every 3 to 4 mechanics that we had. I mean, what is it like in the general shop? Like, how many apprentices are out there that now have to be supervised? How does the ratio work?
You know what? I don't know. I've reached out to a couple of my friends at the MRO shops because I was kind of curious. What's the volume of apprenticeships that they do? And I haven't heard back yet. So I don't want to guess on an answer on that one. But I know a lot of the M&O shops, just like you were talking about, do internships. And so if it's literally 1-to-1, one employee has to 100% supervise one intern, the implications to your labor force have got to be just, I can't even think of the right word, bad, really bad.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about, things taking a long time in the shop today. Imagine what it's like when we've just lost half our workforce.
Yep.
So hopefully this gets addressed quickly. Very stressing news for many people. And it also puts people in limbo right now, because once an FAA interpretation is out, I mean, it's the law of the land, so to speak. Now, I've heard some online rumors that maybe these things won't hold up in court, but if there's an interpretation and you're not doing it today based on the interpretation, your feet are going to be on the fire. You could end up in some serious trouble. So, I mean, I don't know what folks are going to be doing while this kind of gets worked out, if it gets worked out in the first place.
Well, I know Mike Bush is he's not his first go around with the FAA, and but I'm sure there are AOPA and other industry groups that represent the industry will be up in arms and over it, because I don't see how it can stand.
No, I mean, this is the most serious threat to business aviation right now. I mean, everyone needs to come together and work on this immediately. Yeah. All right, to wrap us up today, just a good news story. Well, good news, bad news. So husband and wife were flying a King Air this week from Las Vegas to Monterey. Unfortunately, the husband became incapacitated, but the wife successfully landed the aircraft in Bakersfield. So very excited to hear that she was able to do that successfully. She did run off the runway, but it's her first time probably landing a King Air, so we'll give her that one. Yeah. But that was great to hear. It's good news. And just a reminder that anytime, you have a passenger in your plane, maybe give them some of the basics. You probably do that when you're flying your friends around, right, Delray?
Absolutely. And the interesting one, the aircraft was not crashed. The passenger lived because she, successfully got the aircraft down on the ground. Doesn't matter, it went off the runway. She walked away. But it illustrates your point. Anytime you can have, if you've got a spouse or something riding with you, to give them the basics of, what if. And several associations like the Citation Jet Pilots Group, the Epic Owners Group, a lot of those annual events, they promote courses and, kind of a quick hit orientation for the spouses, what if. The other thing is the Garmin Autoland. This is where technology is coming in as a huge safety factor. The Garmin Autoland system that's in a lot of the newer aircraft, especially single pilot certified IFR aircraft, which are complex aircraft. They go up high. That's almost as good as ADS-BN, being able to see all the traffic around you when you're flying around Dallas-Fort Worth. So relatively good outcome. Wonderful that she was able to put it down. And I applaud the associations like Citation Jet Pilots that promote a little bit of training for the other person in the cockpit.
That's a great idea. And I too, it was cool because I it wasn't, I guess not cool. I keep saying cool because I'm an aviation nerd, but the U.S. Customs and Border Protection, they brought a Super King Air 350ER to fly alongside her to help keep her along the glide path down to the runway, which I always wondered to myself, like, okay, what happens in those situations? Is it just like they find an ATC person who's got some familiarity, but it sounds like what they did was call the local CBP folks that had a similar type aircraft, talked her through it, guided her through it. I mean, that had to be a huge relief, and sure was a terrifying situation for her to at least have, someone to be there on the wing side. But at least she was able to get out and protect herself. Certainly a harrowing story.
Yep, definitely. It emphasizes just in the interest of safety, always having a second person who has some idea of how to get it down.
Yeah. And that's always been my thing. If you can't afford a second pilot in the cockpit, especially as a 135 or, a private 91 operator, you really shouldn't be flying. Just don't do it. It's the cheapest piece of equipment. It's an expensive piece of equipment, but it's the cheapest in terms of safety. Having a second person there, second set of eyes. Incapacitations are quite rare. I don't know what the number is, but it does happen. And we always need to be prepared and vigilant.
Definitely. You can't put enough effort into safety.
Yeah. All right. With that, we're going to wrap up the pod today. Thank you for joining us. The VIP seat is the fastest way to get news on what's happening in your industry. Don't forget to subscribe to our weekly email digest and click wherever you get your podcasts. Comments and suggestions on what we should cover next are always welcome. So we'll see you next time on the VIP seat.